Major trade dispute is erupting between the United States and Canada, sending shockwaves through the heart of North America. What was once a seamless partnership, built on decades of trust and mutual benefit, is now facing its most serious test in a generation. The very foundation of a relationship that has long been a model of economic cooperation is now under threat, as uncertainty ripples through boardrooms and communities on both sides of the border. At the center of the storm are steel and aluminum, industries that form the backbone of both nations' economies, supporting not only massive corporations, but also thousands of families and local businesses. Tensions soared when President Trump, in a series of high-profile speeches and tweets, accused Canada of unfair trade practices. His words ignited a crisis that's shaking North America's economic foundation and dominating headlines across the continent. The Trump administration's aggressive tariffs marked a sharp and unexpected break from decades of close economic integration, leaving many to wonder if the era of open trade was coming to an end. Cross-border supply chains, once seamless and efficient, are now under severe strain. Businesses are scrambling to adapt, rethinking their operations and facing tough choices about jobs, investments, and the future. Trump's rhetoric, framing the issue as a matter of national security, resonated deeply with his political base. But for Canadian leaders, the move was both shocking and deeply personal, challenging the very nature of the alliance. Canada, feeling betrayed by its closest ally, responded with defiance, imposing its own tariffs and rallying public support in a show of national unity. The dispute quickly spilled into the public eye, dominating conversations in homes, workplaces, and the media. Citizens on both sides anxiously watched for their government's next moves, uncertain about what the future might hold. This is more than a policy disagreement, it's a clash of national interests, economic philosophies, and deeply held values, with the potential to reshape the relationship for years to come. The fallout is being felt far beyond the halls of government and corporate boardrooms. Small businesses, factory workers, and entire communities who rely on stable trade are now facing an uncertain and challenging road ahead. As the summer of 2025 unfolds, the stakes keep rising. The world is watching closely, waiting to see how this high-stakes standoff between two of the world's closest allies will ultimately be resolved. The trade war began with a bold and unexpected move from the U.S., a sweeping 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum imports. This decision sent shockwaves through the global market, but it hit Canada the hardest, as the country was America's top supplier of these crucial metals. For decades, the two nations had enjoyed a close trading relationship, with steel and aluminum flowing freely across the border. Suddenly, that trust was shattered, and the rules of the game had changed overnight. The White House justified the tariffs as a national security measure, claiming that America needed to protect its industries from foreign threats. But to most observers, it looked like classic protectionism, an attempt to shield U.S. companies from competition, regardless of the cost to allies. In June, President Trump doubled down, raising tariffs on Canadian metals to a staggering 50%. The announcement was met with disbelief and anger on both sides of the border, as businesses scrambled to understand the new reality. For Canadian producers, the U.S. market isn't just important, it's essential. Nearly 90% of their steel exports head south. Overnight, their products became far less competitive, threatening the livelihoods of thousands of workers and the future of entire communities. Orders from American buyers dried up almost immediately, and supply chains across North America felt the shock. Factories slowed production, warehouses filled with unsold goods, and uncertainty rippled through the industry. A Canadian steel beam that once cost $100 in Ohio now cost $150, pricing many Canadian products out of the market. U.S. companies facing higher costs were forced to look for domestic alternatives or pass the price hikes on to consumers. The impact was immediate and severe. Factories, mines, and workers all felt the pain. Layoffs began, and the sense of economic security that had defined the industry for years started to crumble. Canada now faced a crisis. Accept the economic hit, risking jobs and growth, or fight back and risk escalating the conflict even further. The doubling of tariffs was seen as a hostile act, forcing Canada's hand and igniting public outrage. Protests erupted, and calls for retaliation grew louder. Prime Minister Mark Carney's government moved quickly, signaling that Canada would not back down. Emergency meetings were held, and plans for countermeasures took shape. The stage was set for a new and unpredictable phase in the escalating trade conflict. with both sides preparing for a prolonged standoff. The world watched closely as two longtime allies suddenly found themselves on opposite sides of a bitter economic battle, with global consequences hanging in the balance. Canada hit back with its own tough measures. Ottawa imposed quotas on U.S. steel imports. Once the quota was filled, a 50% surcharge kicked in, mirroring the American tariffs. This made excess U.S. steel prohibitively expensive, shutting the door on American exporters. Canada also moved to block cheap steel from other countries, fearing a flood of diverted global supply. Starting July 16, steel from countries without a free trade deal faced a 50% tariff if imports exceeded half their 2024 levels. Canada kept its 25% retaliatory tariffs on over 530 U.S. products, targeting $30 billion in goods. These actions marked a dramatic shift from Canada's usual open market stance. The message to Washington was clear: Canada would match U.S. pressure with pressure of its own. The trade war was now fully reciprocal. Canada's forceful response was about more than just economics. It was about survival, about protecting its vital steel and aluminum industries from what it saw as an existential threat. These industries are the backbone of many communities, providing stable jobs and supporting local economies. Without decisive action, thousands of jobs could vanish overnight, and entire towns could face economic ruin. Ottawa viewed the U.S. tariffs as not only unfair, but also as a clear violation of long-standing trade agreements. The national security justification was dismissed as not just flawed, but almost insulting, especially given Canada's deep integration in U.S. defense supply chains and its status as a trusted ally. For Canada, retaliation was about more than economics. It was about defending the rules-based international order and standing up to what many Canadians saw as economic bullying from a close partner. There was also a real risk of trade diversion, as U.S. tariffs threatened to flood Canada's market with cheap steel from around the world, putting local producers in jeopardy. To counter this, Canada imposed quotas and tariffs on non-U.S. steel, a defensive shield to protect its own market. Politically, Prime Minister Carney faced immense pressure to act decisively, as anything less would be seen as weakness. The government's strong response managed to unite Canadians across party lines, a rare show of national solidarity. The message was clear: Canada would defend its economy, its workers, and its principles, no matter the cost. The world took note of Canada's determination, and the standoff quickly became a test of national will and resilience. The conflict deepened when Canada introduced a digital services tax targeting tech giants like Google and Amazon, mostly American firms. The tax, retroactive to 2022, could cost U.S. companies up to $3 billion. Washington erupted, calling the tax a direct attack on American business. The U.S. demanded a global approach to digital taxation, but Canada pressed ahead alone. The dispute over tech taxes quickly became entangled with the steel fight. On June 27, Trump terminated all trade talks with Canada, linking steel tariffs to the digital tax. Now, any deal would have to solve both disputes at once, pleasing steelworkers and Silicon Valley alike. For Canada, the tax was about fairness. Tech giants should pay their share where they profit. Ottawa refused to back down even as the cost of confrontation grew. The trade war now spanned industries with no easy solution in sight. The rift between the allies had never been wider. E-trade war's real victims are ordinary people. Canadian steel mills, cut off from their main market, slashed production and laid off workers. Nearly 1,000 steel workers lost their jobs, with more at risk, especially in towns where the mill is the economic heart. The ripple effect hit local businesses, threatening entire communities. Workers with specialized skills face tough choices: retrain, relocate, or rely on government aid. The pain spread beyond steel. Retaliatory tariffs raised costs for Canadian companies and consumers. A farm equipment maker now pays more for U.S. engines, making its products pricier and less competitive. The trade war disrupted businesses and raised the cost of living on both sides of the border. Families and communities bore the brunt of a political standoff. The human cost was mounting, with no end in sight. In response, Canada launched a suite of support programs. $70 million was set aside to help up to 10,000 laid-off steelworkers with income support and retraining. A $1 billion fund helped steel and aluminum firms invest, modernize, and seek new markets. For large companies in crisis, a $10 billion loan program offered vital liquidity. Ottawa also changed procurement rules. Federal projects now require Canadian-made steel, guaranteeing a market for local producers. These measures aim to cushion the blow for workers and help the industry adapt. The strategy: immediate relief for families, long-term resilience for the sector. While not a cure-all, the government's response showed determination to defend Canadian jobs and industry. The fight for survival was on. Despite the turmoil, negotiations continued behind closed doors. Trump and Carney, along with their teams, faced a daunting task: resolve both the steel tariffs and the digital tax dispute. The deadline, August 1, 2025, loomed, with businesses desperate for certainty. The US demanded Canada drop its digital tax. Canada insisted the US lift its 50% tariffs. Neither side blinked, and trust was in short supply. Trump's public termination of talks sent shockwaves, but lower-level discussions persisted. Companies on both sides watched anxiously, their futures hanging in the balance. The challenge: find a deal where both leaders could claim victory. As the deadline approached, the world waited to see if diplomacy could avert disaster. The trade war has shaken the US-Canada relationship to its core. Job losses, higher costs, and uncertainty have left deep scars. The outcome now hinges on the August 1 negotiations. A deal could de-escalate tensions and start rebuilding trust. Failure would mean more tariffs, deeper rifts, and a push for Canada to diversify away from the US. The crisis raises big questions about the future of North America's partnership. Restoring trust and predictability will be a major challenge, no matter the outcome. The steel showdown of 2025 is a defining moment for both nations. The world is watching for signs of compromise and leadership. The fate of thousands of jobs and billions in trade hangs in the balance.